and I have
Welcome to Media Path. I'm Fritz Holm.
And I'm Louise Palanker.
Every week we point you to interesting content from all the areas where content exists, like streaming and broadcast and cable and books and podcasts. And we introduce you to really interesting guests from any one of those fields. Today, we're going to talk to Michael Gregg Michaud. Michael's written a series of biographies on some of Hollywood's most interesting characters, like Sal Mineo and Mae West. I want to talk a lot about Mae West, and the hysterical Alan Seuss. And the book we're here to talk about today, Inventing Troy Donahue, The Making of a Movie Star. Michael will be right with us. First, Wheezy, I have to brag. Whenever there's bragging material, I have to bring it up.
Permission to brag.
One of our favorite things is to offer our listeners the opportunity to reminisce about an iconic popular culture figure defined by our show. Truly amazing folks that are still being rediscovered and appreciated to this day. I want to read a few recent comments from videos on our YouTube channel that illustrate how our show resonates with people, something that makes us really happy. On our Elliot Laurie interview, the musician behind Looking Glass and their timeless Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, Leland Weinberg says, enjoy watching. Remember Brandy coming out in 1972 when I was 16 years old. Now at 68, I sing and have Brandy in my list of favorites for singing karaoke at Yorba Linda and Fullerton Community Centers.
I think he also has Brandy in his coffee, but we'll get to that.
And American Legion area in Orange County. Well,
Awesome.
Listen, we are so glad that we've provided a memory for you. And for the interview with Melanie, John Collins says, one of the best rock and roll stories Melanie told, leaving her body experience, and the first one who the audience lit the candles for which she wrote one of her great songs, Lay Down, Candles in the Rain, a spiritual, haunting, joyful song. Remember, you can watch all of our episodes with additional visuals at youtube.com/@MediaPathPodcast. And in audio news, on Google leaderboards, we are number 8 on the top 100 TV weekly chart.
Oh, it's on Good Pods, Fritzy.
Oh, is that? See, right now this looks like a giant centipede walking across the screen. Look how small the type is.
Maybe it is a centipede. Flick it.
Good Pods leaderboards were number 8 in the top 100 TV weekly chart and number 13 in the top 100 TV monthly chart. Are you kidding? So thank you so much. Wherever you're listening and watching, we appreciate it, and for taking this journey with us into our fantastic shared cultural history experience.
Yes.
Wheezy, what have you had?
Oh, so I've been watching TV, Fritz.
Okay.
And I watched Willie Nelson and Family on Paramount. Willie Nelson's gentle demeanor belies his ferocious tenacity and restless intensity, but you'll find the true nature of the man in his lyrics. Still moving to me. The life I love is making music with my friends. My heroes have always been cowboys. But now I'm so much better, so if my words don't come together, listen to the melody, because my love is in there hiding. The fullness of his collection of layers come into focus in a 4-part docuseries on Paramount called Willie Nelson and Family, featuring dozens of interviews with musicians, family members, bandmates, and Willie experts. The series packs 9 decades of Willie history into 200 marvelous minutes. Here's a guy who creates album after album of endlessly engaging music, throws enormous 4th of July parties on his ranch, uniting hippies and rednecks, fills a bus with his family band traversing the globe to share the celebration of his songs, but is known as an outlaw. Lost everything to the IRS, handpicked his next manager based on the prison time he did for Willie, engaged in a full-scale shootout on his ranch involving his daughter's abusive husband and at least 2 of his 4 wives, and spends most of his waking hours pretty well baked on good pot. The docuseries is an excellent companion to Willie's autobiography called It's a Long Story. But both or either give you the scope of the man, and it's a glorious array of flavors. One important lesson that you pick up watching this series, or the Paul Simon doc on MGM Plus, or the Steve Martin doc on Apple Plus, is that we see these legends as they are, as we have come to know them within their completeness and one with their body of work. But finding their true north was about 15 years of toil and struggle in the making. You can correct me if I'm wrong about this one, Fritz, but an artist who will become essential puts in about 15 years of unheralded effort in their 20s and into their 30s, and that muscle mass of identity fortifies them for a lifetime of creative output, meaning they now swim with changing currents. They are instructed by failure. They invent, they experiment, they inspire and challenge themselves, and they continue learning. Finding your authentic voice takes years, but as you search, you hone your craft, you log stage time, you get better and stronger, and once you have it, you're equipped for a lifetime of creative contribution. Forever modern, Willie Nelson appears throughout Beyoncé's Cowboy Carter album, revisiting his radio DJ persona in Smoke Hour and Smoke Hour 2, jockeying his way into Beyoncé's monster smash, Texas Hold'em. Willie Nelson and Family is on Paramount.
Yeah, and the thing I loved about all three of those documentaries you mentioned was all of them are as surprised at their success as the general public is. They can't believe they got where they are.
Right.
I love Steve Martin. Just could not believe this tsunami he started as the most famous comic in the history of comedy.
Boy, did he.
All right, I'm going to talk about a series that is not new, but has found a new life in a different place. It's on Amazon Prime right now. It's called Loudermilk. The series premiered in 2017, but after season 2, it was left to die when its original streamer, AT&T's audience platform, folded itself into HBO Max. Eventually, it was picked up on Amazon Prime, including an unaired season 3. That's where I stumbled across all 3 seasons. This is the story of Sam Loudermilk, played by Ron Livingston, who is the lead in one of the funniest and most iconic movies of all time, Office Space.
Big yay on that.
Love that.
Yeah.
Sam is a former music critic and a recovering alcoholic. He's gone on to become a substance abuse counselor and a support group leader in the Seattle area. He likes to dole out acid-tongued, blistering advice to his clients, his friends, and even random people just walking by. Sam doesn't even have his own life together, but pushes through with the purpose of helping the other addicts in his AA group. He's the leader of the group, along with its heart and its moral center. I don't know anything about this show until I stumbled across it. I was drawn to it, though, because it's about addiction and AA, a haunting familiar topic in my family's life. These group members are like a family, all trying to stay afloat in the leaky boat of sobriety. It reminds me of the original Newhart show, where Bob is a therapist and the ringleader of this dysfunctional circus of characters. Although the show's driving force is its humor, it stays true to the struggle for sobriety. It's funny and honest and real. Some of the other breakout characters are his recovering roommates, Ben Burns, played by Will Sasso, and Claire Wilkes, played by Anja Savchik. A nice surprise for me is an attendee in the group, Brian Regan, who's one of America's premier stand-up comics. He plays Winston Muggsy Bennington. Over and above his comedy chops, he's got some really poignant acting moments, and I think in this show has proven himself a skilled actor. You'll probably see him in movies. Sam Loudermilk is a guy who has been flattened by his addiction, but is fighting his way back. The 2 things helping him back are having this group to mentor and nurture, and his fast and withering sense of humor. Loudermilk is on Amazon Prime.
Wonderful.
I liked it. It's really a lot of fun.
Yeah, I will check that out.
Now let's introduce our guest, Michael Gregg Michaud. Michael's written several show business biographies, including Sal Mineo, which I told him before I thought was the most interesting character, the most sympathetic character in Rebel Without a Cause. He's written about Mae West, one of the great and early powerful women in show business. Alan Seuss, the actor and comedian famous for being one of the stars of Laugh-In. The book we're going to talk about today is Inventing Troy Donahue, The Making of a Movie Star. Michael, it's nice to have you here.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Let's talk about Merle Johnson Jr., later to be known as Troy Donahue. Man did dozens of films and TV shows while under contract at Universal, and then went to Warner Brothers and then back to Universal. He starred with many Hollywood starlets, Angie Dickinson, Suzanne Plachette, Connie Stevens, and others. Handsome, all-American guy, athletic, the vision of what a young American male should have looked like in the 50s. But he had some real struggles in his life, which were a revelation to me. Although the media was not the same then as it is now, it was he had a very sad and tough struggle. Right?
Well, he did. He was born into a wealthy family. He adored his dad, who made films for General Motors. They were industrial films and advertising films. They lived on Central Park. He thought Central Park was his backyard for years. And
both of his parents were sort of, at least peripherally involved in show business.
His mother, who was Swedish, was an actress when she met his dad, Merle Sr. He got very sick when he was 6 years old. He got pneumonia, and he was bedridden for several months. And to help his recovery, his father decided to buy a large estate in Bayport, Long Island, and they moved there. Troy was not an academic wonder. He's a smart kid, but book learning didn't really interest him. He's a bit of a rascal. He adored his dad, and they did every kind of thing that a father and son would do: fishing, boating, all of it. He had a little sister who was born 7 years after he was born. But his dad contracted Lou Gehrig's disease, and it took about 2 years for him to pass away. And it was devastating for Troy.
That was a pivotal moment in Troy's life. He was about 14 when that happened.
Yes, and he was the head of the family now.
For which he was ill-prepared.
Absolutely. He didn't know what to do. And he started drinking when he was in grade 7. And he was an alcoholic.
That was a mind-blower. Wow.
Right. He was an alcoholic very shortly and was plastered, until he got sober in 20 years before he died.
Now, Troy, you mentioned near the end of the book, or Beverly Garland discovers through a performance of Love Letters, where you're reading, that Troy is dyslexic. And it feels to me like that impacted absolutely everything in the trajectory of his life, because why do you start drinking at age 11? It's because dyslexic kids were told that they were stupid, that they weren't trying hard enough, all of these things that confound a child. And they were a social family, so there was alcohol in the household, and he took a drink, and it made him feel like he didn't have any issues. And that really imprinted on him and in his genetic structure this, yearning or longing for alcohol to feel like everybody else.
Right. Well, I think that contributed to his poor learning skills, of course. I mean, he couldn't read like other kids. I don't know how, at that time, when he was so young, I don't know if they really knew very much about dyslexia.
They knew nothing.
Yeah. So it was just a kid who couldn't learn or struggled to read. And I think that it did certainly interfere with everything, including when he began to work in Hollywood. He had a very, very, very tough time learning scripts, remembering, and needed, Delmer Daves, his feature film director for the first 4 feature films that he made, said that he needed 10 or 12 takes before he warmed up and could really get the lines down. And Diane Mcbain, who worked with him very often, was a very dear friend, said the same thing, that it was very difficult for him. In motion pictures, you had more time. They could work with you to get out of you what they needed. Television was especially tough on him, because there was no way you could get 10 or 12 takes. You had to do it very quickly.
And they're doing script changes constantly. They're handing you new pages, and if you're not willing to say, "Hey, help me, I can't read," which who would be willing to say that? None of us.
Right.
So he was just playing from behind constantly without the actual problem ever being addressed. And he found, girlfriends that helped him learn lines overnight, but if they hand you new pages on the set, he's sunk. And so that's what was happening. To me, it felt like in his TV career that it was beyond him. And so he would drink more because it was.
Yeah, he admitted that he was never sober when he was on camera.
That is correct.
Wow.
In fact, he was hoodwinked into doing the film Palm Springs Weekend, which was oddly enough, it was a hit, but it wasn't a very good film. And he was so resentful of that. He was under contract at Warner Brothers, so you had to do what they gave you to do. And he objected because he was playing a college-age student, and he was too old. He felt he was too old for that. And when he told them that he wouldn't do the film, they, of course, suspended him. And he was always on the brink of no money and bankruptcy. So he finally did do the film, but he admitted later that every day, that was filmed on location in Palm Springs, every day to get up in the morning, he was taking everything, drugs, cocaine, alcohol, everything, just to be able to open the door to go to work.
In your book, you say he'd wake up, take 3 aspirins laced with codeine, slug down a pint of vodka, followed by 4 lines of cocaine.
Right.
That was the morning ritual.
Yeah, that was to open the front door.
Yeah. And so I think that Hollywood knew this guy, A, isn't prepared, is difficult to work with, and B, he's drunk or he's medicated. So as much as he, while he was still an addict, wanted to blame the system and the image and the whole thing, we see other guys like Robert Redford that rode every wave that came in because they had, their faculties available to them. He just didn't. And later on in the book, when it's so richly researched and you have so many interviews of him when he's touring with Bye Bye Birdie, every city he went into, he said yes to the interviews. And so you've got all that. Mm-hmm. You see how imaginative and articulate and bright and sharp and aware and perceptive he is about himself once he's clean.
Yes, that's right.
He's a bright guy.
What was his personality over and above everything we've talked about so far?
I met him a couple of times through Diane Mcbain, a frequent co-star and his very dear friend. He was very funny. He was self-deprecating. He had the most beautiful speaking voice that I'd ever heard for an actor. He could have made a career of voiceover or commercial work. He had a beautiful speaking voice. He was very gracious. But he had a very good sense of humor about himself, and he later came to realize, that he certainly wasn't a Shakespearean actor, and he did the best he could with what they gave him. He became a star very, very quickly with an enormous teenage audience with A Summer Place, and he never could really break out of that sort of characterization. The studio gave him over and over again, which is what they did at that time. And it was very frustrating for him. He was very fortunate because, as I said, the first 4 feature films he did at Warner's, he had Delmer Daves, the same director, who really was very fond of him and knew how to work with him.
Right. Mm-hmm. His particular
because once that professional association ended, Troy had a very hard time securing projects at the studio and working with the directors that he was given.
He wanted to be an actor and probably knew that from an early age because I love the story you tell about his parents taking him to Broadway shows and movies. Yes. Then he would come home immediately and within an hour create a costume and then reenact this movie in his home.
Right.
I mean, there's a kid who's destined for show business.
Yeah. It was something that interested him from the beginning, and it was very enchanting. And his mom knew so many people who were very successful on stage. And it was a wonderful thing to introduce your kid to. And it certainly made a lasting impression. I think it informed his decisions with what he was going to do for a career.
And his mom used to read him romance novels and act out all the parts, which is so cute.
Yeah.
Talk about his manager, the guy who takes him on, because he's depicted in the Ryan Murphy Hollywood series. This guy is pretty famous and infamous manager. Talk about
Henry Wilson.
Yes. Talk about Henry and the scene that swirled around him.
Yeah. Henry Wilson was a very successful show business manager, specializing in handsome young men. He managed Rock Hudson, Guy Madison, Tab Hunter. In fact, he renamed all of them.
He was the guy.
It's almost like an ownership thing. Like even if your name was pretty good, it's like he wanted to stamp his own brand on you.
That's right. But he was very, very helpful and in a professional way to get Troy moving along. There was he had a very bad reputation, and Troy was aware of that. But he said that he never really was suckered into that. He appreciated the work that Henry did. But he was quite a predatory sort of fellow.
Troy was mistaken for being gay, right? Because he got like the Troy Donahue, the
Tab Hunter.
The Tab Hunter backwash a little bit.
Yeah.
But seemed to deal with it pretty well. I mean, you talk in the book about Rock Hudson making a move on him, but I mean, just kind of cast that off as part of the territory.
Right. I don't think it really bothered him, but he and Tab were mistaken for each other all the time. They were, very good-looking men, pretty boys. Neither one of them were overly gifted with acting abilities, but they looked like movie stars.
I'm sorry, finish that thought.
People mix them up all the time. And he would laugh it off, and he would say, Tab, he's the gay one.
He took it in stride because if you work in Hollywood, whether it was probably the silent film era or today, there's a lot of gay folks who work here, and he probably just took it in stride. It's whatever. I mean, public image was one thing, but they all knew who each other were.
Sure.
And, what people were drawn to. But there's a guy you talk about called Mike Connolly, and you talk about how he would write a column and people could read between the lines and understand what he was talking about in his columns. Give an example of what that was like, because there's the Hollywood that's presented to the world back then, and then there's the reality of Hollywood.
Right. He was a entertainment reporter, reviewed shows, very worked for LA Times, very powerful, good writer, humorous. He was gay, and he ran around in that pink mafia circle that existed in Hollywood. And he reported, you're right, there was a reading between the lines. There were certain code words and phrases that he would use. And people were afraid of him because I don't think that he was a vicious person. I don't think that he really outed anybody that I've ever, found any records of. But he could make or break a show. And I think everybody was, very aware of that and tried to work with him. Troy was very affable. He had a wonderful way, an easy charm.
Yeah, it was kind of a laissez-faire thought about the gayness and all the other stuff. He didn't care.
Right. No, he didn't care. He wanted to work. He loved women. He had many girlfriends, and in the early days when he was first started, he had Playboy magazine centerfolds he was dating, and he wasn't great with women. He was a womanizer, and he was married for 4 times. That wasn't so great either, but he loved women, and I think he was so secure in who he was that it didn't make any difference to him what anybody else might have thought,
Back in the 50s and 60s, at the end of the studio system, which is where he found himself, they had these arranged marriages. It was a public relations thing. And were any of the 4 marriages that he was in one of those arranged by the studio to sort of put to rest the alleged gay thing?
Well, that's something that I had wondered about when I started researching the book. I don't think that was the case. He met... Suzanne Plachette was his first wife. They met actually by accident Christmas shopping, and then later came to become more acquainted and work together in a film, Rome Adventure, when they began their affair. But they dated for maybe 18 months before they ever married, and they seemed to be very happy. She actually was really on the rise. She was getting prime A pictures. He was not. But she's very beautiful. They were a beautiful couple and very social. And I think that for some reason they decided to get married. The marriage lasted 25 days. But,
they gave it a good run.
It seemed like that was the best way to break up with somebody was to marry them.
That worked for him.
It's like once they move in, it's like, this is not going to work.
Yeah,
but she was, Suzanne Plachette is like one of the world's most engaging people. I mean,
Yes.
you can see why he loved her.
Yeah.
There's no one that would replace her.
Right.
She's a one of a kind.
Mm-hmm. And they stayed, despite a very painful breakup, they actually remained friendly and became more friendly as time went on. And she thanked him much later for making her laugh and giving her a sense of humor, which was great.
Let's talk about his film origin story, which is his meeting in a diner with James Sheldon and William Asher. Describe, first of all, who those two men are, and one sort of saw his future and the other didn't.
Right. Sheldon worked with James Dean. Both of the men were in production and direction and worked at Columbia Studios. And there was a restaurant in the valley called the Golden Pheasant. And it was right where Ventura Boulevard, it was in Calabasas, where Ventura Boulevard comes close to Malibu Canyon Road. And at that time, a lot of people, including Troy, lived in Malibu. And they worked in the valley where all the film work was. So when they were finished with the workday, they would drive home and stop at the Golden Pheasant for a couple of drinks or maybe a steak, I think maybe a couple of drinks, and then before they went home. And one night, Troy was there, was sitting at the bar wearing jeans and a leather jacket, looking, I suppose, like a young wannabe actor. And these two gentlemen spotted him and approached him and asked him, are you an actor? And he said yes. And they invited him to come to Columbia Studios for a screen test. And he did. He didn't do a very good job. But Sheldon still felt like there was something there. And he and Asher gave him another opportunity to come back and do a really serious screen test and give him some time to study. And he prepared for that very, very well. And a couple of days before that was scheduled, he went out with a buddy who had just passed his bar, I think, and they stopped at the Golden Pheasant, and they got plastered. Uh-oh. And Troy had a sports car, and he drove them back to his place in Malibu and drove off the road in Malibu Canyon. His friend, thankfully, was thrown clear, but Troy went over the embankment with the car and was very, very seriously hurt. Of course, he missed the scheduled screen test, and it took him a long time, months and months to recover, which he eventually did. And Fran Bennett was a young actress who became friends with him. She was introduced to him by a mutual friend. And Fran had a small role in Giant, but she was represented, one of the few females represented by Henry Wilson. And she said to him, Henry would really like you. So she arranged for them to meet. They had a dinner at the Luau, which was a very popular spot in Beverly Hills. And that's how he met Henry, and that's how that all started.
Tell us how he booked a summer place.
Sandra Dee, for one thing, who was the cutest person in the show.
Yeah, Sandra Dee was a very popular star at that time. And Sal, I got too many men in my head. Troy did Imitation of Life. That was the first. He did a handful of movies at Universal, none of which anybody saw, and most of them were released after his contract expired at Universal, so it didn't do him any good. But he did Imitation of Life, and it was a rough part that he played. He played the boyfriend of Susan Conner's character, and when he discovered that she was actually black, passing for white, he beat her up. Oh. And he was afraid of that when they started the film. But Wilson believed that would really make a difference with him and put him on the map, which it did. And then he was up for a summer place, and he was exactly what they were looking for. I think it was accidental, really. I think it was serendipitous. He was just exactly what the young man they were looking for looked like. And that was Delmer Daves, who took to him right away and wanted him for the part, even though he was over his head. It's probably his most memorable film. It's not the best film, but it's got a great cast, and his chemistry with Sandra Dee was wonderful.
And
it's beautiful to look at.
Great music.
Great music, the greatest theme song, beautiful cinematography, and two beautiful people. Years and years later, he did was invited to go to San Francisco to the Castro Theater to do a special tribute to A Summer Place, and Sandra went as well. And he said, and he had seen it once before in New York, a couple of years before, but he said he never really. That was the first time ever that he realized that he had been this incredible matinee idol. He said when his face came on the screen with Sandra Dee's, he said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He never knew. When you're in the middle of it, you don't know. When you're in the middle of the storm, you don't know it. But so many years later, and he said that it was stunning. It was so beautiful. But it was a very important film, and that's what landed him ultimately the contract with Warner Brothers.
And now he's overnight, he's a teen idol.
It happened in the blink of an eye.
Right.
And he was getting, thousands of fan letters a week. He traveled all around the country to promote the film, which they used to do at that time.
Yeah, I'm not to interrupt, but I just want to make sure that in your book, it's so interesting. Those guys were expected, even if it wasn't to do a viewing of the movie, to go to like a mall somewhere and sign autographs and
That's
just shake
right.
people's hands all over the United States.
That's right. And he did. He actually liked that. He liked meeting people. And I think that as people who work on the stage have an interaction with an audience every night. When you're making a television show or especially a film, you don't know how the public is reacting to what you're doing. You don't really see that. So that gave him an opportunity. And he was stunned the first time he went out. He was absolutely stunned. I mean, they were chased down the streets. One time they were in New York and the fans nearly broke through a plate glass window of the restaurant where they were trying to eat. It was stunning, and it was frightening at the same time.
I think, too, when you lose a parent so young, there's a hunger or desperation for approval because you never got to grow into a man in front of your dad's eyes. Yeah. And so you're left your whole life with just needing to know that you're doing okay and that people are responding favorably to your adult life's work.
Right.
And that's what he found in the fans.
Right.
Let's talk about parents. Because both of his parents were sort of, I don't want to say frustrated performers or, sort of frustrated show business people. When he became famous, was there any jealousy there? That often happens. It's like he's living the dream that they never had type thing.
Right. Well, his father passed away, of course, before he had any success. Right. His mother, I don't think that there was any sort of jealousy. She really was along for the ride. She moved here. She followed him here with her mother as well.
And the little sister.
And little sister Eve. And he was crazy about his mom and included her. She went to every party, every premiere. And the people who, and she was very pretty. She was very young when she had him. She was still very pretty and charming. And all of his friends really loved her. But I don't really think, I never saw anything that would indicate she was jealous of his success. He was very generous with her and helped her and his grandmother and his sister as long as he was able to with money, even helping them when he really couldn't afford it. But he was very, very appreciative of his mother who stuck by him through thick and thin.
Now, Troy never started a family with any of his many wives, but tell us what did happen.
Well, he had two illegitimate children, a son, Sean, and a daughter, Janine.
But talk about how he discovered them.
Well, it was, the son, especially, a woman approached him at a party and said, "You see this boy over here? He's your son." And
wow.
Yeah, Sean.
Thanks for the heads up on that one.
Well, they never, it's an interesting thing. They never did any blood tests. He accepted both of these women's word for that they were his offspring. Sean did look a bit like him, but he took to the kid.
I was going to say, did he have any relationship with him?
He did.
That's great.
He did. He really took to him and included him in things. And Janine had kids. He was a granddad, and really tried hard, to be a part of their lives. They each had a different mom, and the women never asked him for a penny. It wasn't about money. She didn't introduce him to his son because she wanted money. She never asked for that. And I think that, I think he gave him great happiness. Whether they were his blood children or not, they probably were. They certainly could have been. The timing was such that he was, intimate with these women at these times, and he remembered them. So,
what draws you to the people you write about? I mean, what was it about Troy's story? What was it about Sal Mineo's story, or Mae West?
Yeah, Mae West. Marlene and Dietrich is another book I wrote. The women, Marlene and Dietrich and Mae West, were very strong, very, very strong independent women. These other young men, Sal Mineo, Troy Donahue, Christopher Jones, the one I'm working on, and even Alan Seuss, Diane Mcbain, who had incredible struggles with her own life and survival, a victim of vicious rapes, but they had very. I think it's the opposite of the sort of Hollywood story that is mythical to people. I come from a very small town in Maine, and growing and I love movies. I've always loved movies, and I love movie magazines, and it looked terribly glamorous. Mm-hmm. They were at beautiful parties. They wore beautiful clothes. They drove beautiful automobiles. They looked like they were happy. They were with beautiful people, and you get I had the idea as a youngster that that's what Hollywood was, golden, this promised land, which of course it's not. Mm-hmm. So when I moved here, and I was interested in the movie culture. I was not in the movie business, but the gentlemen that I've written about and continue to write about are people who really had terrible struggles. Mm-hmm. They had success, and they played the part of a movie star, but their lives were car wrecks. Mm-hmm. And some of them, Sal certainly ended terribly. He was murdered. Troy, thankfully...
Oh, my God. People would not believe what he went through in the throes of his addiction. Sleeping in his car, mm-hmm. couch surfing at friends' homes when he had his home repossessed or something. Right. I mean, really, you look at these handsome people, there he is with a photo of Sandra Dee, and you're thinking, wow, what could possibly go wrong?
How could it happen?
Bankruptcy, he's sleeping in a bush.
Oh, my goodness.
And bankruptcy, he lost everything. And in Central Park, he would go home with fans who recognized him so he could take a shower and have a meal. And this was a guy who won a Golden Globe for Most Promising Actor and was in the top 10 box office stars. It's amazing, that ride, from the bottom to the top to the bottom again.
He was ill-equipped for the ride he was about to go on. And because there's no, if you jump out of a plane, they put you through training. Here's what you do with this, and here's what you do. Yeah. But they shoot you out of a rocket into movie stardom, and no one's doing any sort of background check to make sure that you have the emotional stability to handle what's about to happen to you. And a lot of people don't.
Yeah, there's no guidebooks.
No. And the media was so different back then. The studios were protective of their property.
Yes.
Now with social media and everything, everybody would have known all this about Troy Donahue before his career ended. I mean, it's a different world.
It is a very different world.
And he had some losses. He lost to Warren Beatty for Splendor of the Grass, right?
He did.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
That turned out
well. Warren Beatty did a pretty good job on that one.
I don't know
it's hard to imagine Troy pulling that one off. But he was very, very disappointed.
Yeah.
It really was, Warren gets this film and he's in Palm Springs weekend. I mean, it was just very, very disappointing. And
I think Warren had better access to a range of emotions, and Troy was battling stuff, Right. But, I mean, it's easy for me to say. Maybe Troy could have dug in and done it beautifully. But you talk about him once he gets pancreatitis and how painful that is, that he's like, all right, I got to stop drinking because I'm in a lot of pain. But I don't think it's as easy as just showing up at an AA meeting. No. So did he go somewhere to get medical help before his, or during, when he first attempted recovery? Like, your book kind of indicates that he just walks into a meeting. What more do you know about what it took? Because once he got sober, he was dedicated to being sober.
Right. So he stayed sober until his death.
And you hear it in his voice, in his ability to see his life with some perspective, and to be grateful and gracious and just resolved to be the best person he can moving forward. I never saw a recovery story that happened that cleanly. So what all went on to make that possible for him?
I don't know how clean it really was. He was physically ill several times, hospitalized with pancreatitis, and that was caused by the drinking. And he was told that if you keep this up, you're going to kill yourself. But I think it was a combination of a career that had stalled, the failure of his fourth marriage, and feeling physically compromised and vulnerable. And I think that's what did it. He went to a meeting, and I could never find anything more than that he went to an AA meeting and really committed himself to that. It couldn't have been easy. And he didn't want to be a professional recovering alcoholic. He didn't want to do that for the rest of his life. But he did do things with conventions and speaking about it freely. He wasn't ashamed of it. And I think that contributes to your recovery as well, if you own it and feel, that you can talk about it, and perhaps people will benefit from your stories.
Oh, absolutely.
He had many television successes too. Surfside 6, 77 Sunset Strip, which you could compare to like Miami Vice or Hawaii Five-0. They were they were the big sort of hip, water-oriented, sunshine, tan, well-glistened body things at the time. And he had, back in those days, it was almost a situation where movie stars would look down their nose at television stars, but he had a hefty television career as well.
He did have a great career in television, but that was really because he was under contract to Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers in the 1950s, Mr. Warner very astutely recognized that television was coming, and there was no stopping it. So his son-in-law, Bill Orr, was put in charge of television development for Warner Brothers, and they had a distribution deal with ABC. So they produced, everything that they produced was exhibited on ABC TV. Surfside 6, and when you're under contract, as we talked about before, you have to do what they give you. Troy would have preferred doing feature films. But if they give you a television gig, you have to do it.
So give us the plot line. Surfside 6, what's the show about? It's surfers that solve crimes or something like that.
Well, Surfside 6 is about very pretty people.
Yes.
Three incredibly handsome men who run around in shorts, and the very stunningly beautiful Diane Mcbain, who played Daffy Dutton. And they have a private detective agency that they run out of a houseboat in Miami Beach.
Because why not?
Well, why not is right.
Yep.
And their friend Margarita Sierra played Cha-Cha, who was a performer at the Boom Boom Room in the Fontainebleau across the street, and somehow managed to get herself involved in cases now and then.
Oh.
The show was very successful. It was a 1-hour show in black and white. Even though it looked like Miami Beach, they did do about 2 weeks of location shooting there, but everything was on the Warner Brothers lot. He didn't like the show. Diane hated it. But you power through it. It ran for 2 years, and that was and they were making films at the same time. When you're under contract, you work every day. And if you have a television series, you may not be on screen every day, but you could be doing a feature film or another television show on the days you're not working on that one.
They own you.
Absolutely.
TV, films, and records.
Yes.
They tried to make a recording star out of him as well.
Yeah, he did the theme song for Palm Springs Weekend, which was quite a misery. But he knew that was nothing that he wanted to do either. But Surfside 6 was an enormous hit. It was a 1-hour show, and it ran for 2 years, and they made 74 episodes.
Wow.
In 2 years.
Really?
And
so the rerun was not a thing yet, huh?
Not yet.
Okay.
But they do 25 or 30 episodes a year for all hit TV shows.
Right.
Man,
more than 30 if you know.
And as soon as
math.
Surfside was finished, they put him into another one, Hawaiian Eye.
And he went into the 4th season of Hawaiian Eye with Robert Conrad.
Yes, and Connie
So
Stevens.
now he's on a surfboard and he's solving crimes. So it's a
same thing.
range.
And again, some of that was filmed on location. Most of that was filmed on the Warner Brothers lot. But he did many guest shots on TV.
Yeah.
He did all of like anyone who was under contract at Warner's at that time, including Diane Mcbain and Connie, they were put into every Warner's show at some point. They had a lot of westerns at the time. Some of the programs were good, some were not so good, but they were kept busy. But he did a lot of TV work, and he continued to do TV work when the feature film career ended. He walked away in 1965 from his contract at Warner Brothers and tried to make it as an independent, but
didn't he go back to Universal after that? He
did. He had a 1-year contract. He did The Virginian and a couple of 3 or 4 programs. And then, he was something that we don't really hear too much about anymore. Because now we have, with streaming services, you've got an endless supply of avenues for, production and exhibiting work. Troy did, I think, maybe 20 made-for-video films. That was something new that started in the 1970s when VHS tapes
Straight to video, as we've called it.
Straight to video.
Yep.
And
like
they were
Mega Shark or some of those.
They were awful. They were so bad. He would do, but he had enough of a name so that all these minor production houses would hire him, and he would have a very minor role. He might do 2 days' work, possibly, for $2,000 or $4,000, which was a lot of money.
But he's still on the poster.
Yes, and his name was right there.
Yeah,
and he worked on I think maybe 24 of those, one after the other after the other. It was his bread and butter.
So let's talk a little bit. You've written many books. Let's talk a little bit about the lives of some of the other folks that, you have to really be interested in something to devote, I'm sure, a couple of years of your life to write. Sal Mineo, which was turned into a TV series or a TV movie starring James Franco, and 2 books about Mae West, the 3rd coming up, and Alan Seuss, who's an interesting, that to me is a life I know nothing about, so I would find it interesting to read about Alan Seuss. But tell us a little bit about these people that you studied and lived with as you wrote about them.
Sal Mineo took 10 years to write. That was my first book.
Oh, really?
I didn't know what I was doing. If I had known that it would take 10 years, I would never have done it.
Did you ever feel Sal on your shoulder going, no, that's not what
I had many strange experiences.
Talk about
during the making of that.
I love this.
And so many things, serendipitous things happened. He had, the only girlfriend he ever had was an actress, Jill Howarth, who starred with him in Exodus. she lived in New York. She was a recluse, and everybody told me she won't talk. And his boyfriend, Courtney Burr, was with him the last 6 years or so. And Courtney taught acting with Margie Haber at the Margie Haber studio in West Hollywood, and he lives in Los Angeles. And I tracked Courtney down. He hung up on me 3 or 4 times when I said I want to write a book about Sal Mineo. It scared people because Sal's life was imperfect. And many times people are afraid of what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. Are you going to slay them? Or, what are you doing? I had no track record. It was my first book, and I really didn't know what I was doing. But I was persistent, and finally we met, and it was through him that we were able to get a hold of Jill Haworth. And Jill and I became wonderful friends. It was the same problem with her. She hung up on me many times, and she had never spoken about her life with Sal. Neither had Courtney. So it was an incredible journey that I went on with both of them, and still friends with Courtney. Jill passed away right shortly after the book was released. I was very, very fond of her. We would watch all the award shows together because she was very gossipy, and we'd be on the telephone together watching them. And most of those award shows are live, so it's a different time, but it's live, in New York and here. Mm-hmm. And she would call me before and ask what kind of food that she was going to order, because she ordered everything to go, delivered. She didn't go out. So we would watch these award shows, and she would dish everybody. I adored her. Broke my heart when she died. And I wouldn't have had the book that I have without her. But that book was 10 years. James Franco optioned it. It's not a TV movie. He did a horrible feature film, and he has a very minor role in it. He wrote the screenplay. He produced it, directed it. It was very disappointing. But, that happens with authors and movies. Once you sell it, that you're done. You just hope that the check clears.
Now, when you did Sal Mineo and all these other people, do you have to acquire the rights from the estate, or what are the legalities?
No, they're public people, public figures. If there's something that certainly at times there are photographs that are copyrighted that you need to negotiate with or get permission for. And I contacted everybody that I could who knew him. His family wouldn't talk to me. They talked to me after the book came out, and they loved the book.
Really?
So, and in fact, his cousin Marie was so regretful that she would not talk to me.
Well, you can understand that people didn't know you, but that's so interesting. I completely understand why you studied Mae West. First of all, hysterical. She and W.C. Fields together, come on. But at the time, and you tell me if I'm wrong about this, she might have been one of the most powerful females in Hollywood. She called all the shots. She wrote her films, she produced them, and often directed them. Talk about that.
She was very powerful. She came out here. She was suggested for a role in the movie Night After Night by George Raft, who was a friend of hers from New York. She came out here to do one picture. That was the film. And the film was very successful. And her appearance on the screen was so incendiary that George Raft said she stole everything but the cameras. And Paramount Studio at that time was on the verge of bankruptcy. This is 1932. And they made a proposition to her. She did not come out here with a full movie contract. She came out to do one film. But they proposed a contract with her. And she could do whatever she wanted. She was paid $5,000 a week as an actress. She was paid to write her screenplays. The first picture that she chose, She Done Him Wrong, was based on her Broadway hit, Diamond Lil. So she was paid as the author of the play that was adapted to the screen.
Oh.
Then she was paid to write the screenplay.
Yeah.
Then she was paid to star in the film.
So she's banking.
She was making money hand over fist.
What was her vaudeville act? Did she have handsome, well-cut men and the same thing she
Well,
did?
she had been, no, not really. They were singing and dancing, comedy. But, you know, she started when she was 8. So she transitioned into Broadway in 1920, somewhere in there.
Such a great character.
Mm-hmm.
I think you should make a movie and make Melissa McCarthy Mae West.
Oh, that'd be fun.
I always thought that the young woman the very pretty blonde from Dallas, I can't think of her name.
I know exactly.
Does it
who you-
start with like Charlene or something?
Yeah, Charlene Tilton.
Yes.
Okay.
She could play Mae West.
Wow.
I think. You know, there was.
I think Busy Phillips could play Mae West too.
Yeah, you know, I think the only way it's going to work. They were proposing to do a film about the play Sex that she had written, which put her into prison. She was convicted of corrupting the morals of New York City, which she said was her greatest achievement.
Wow.
And
That's a heck of a fall.
yeah, she wore that one like a badge. And they wrote a screenplay, and they were looking for Bette Midler. They wanted Bette Midler to play the role, but Bette was too old, really. I see George Raft. Bette was just too old, you know, for that. And it never came to pass. You know, with Mae West, you have a career that spans 80 years. Mm-hmm. And you go from vaudeville to Broadway to movies to radio to television to recording, and then she wrote 5 books.
Wow.
I don't know anyone.
Steve Allen.
Yeah, well, Steve
Oh
Allen's
my
another
God.
good example of
Did
that.
she have her own TV show?
No, but they tried to put one together in the early 1950s, and they were afraid of her, afraid of what she would do, and that never came to pass. Probably that was better that way.
Yeah.
But when you have a career that lasts so long, how in the world do you get that into one film? Mm-hmm. You just can't.
Miniseries.
Yes, a miniseries or focus on a certain aspect of her life or career. I haven't written biographies of her. The 3 books I've written about her are very specific. Mae West Between the Covers is a collection of editorial features and interviews from movie magazines in the 1930s that chart her ascendancy into stardom. Then I wrote a book called Mae West Broadcast Muse, and that covers all of her work in radio and television, and I include all of the scripts from all of that.
Oh, interesting.
Was she ever married?
Yes. Yeah, it was a marriage of convenience, and then it came back to haunt her later. But as
Where
they
she
often
made more
do.
money than he did and probably had
Oh
to
yeah,
shovel
then
it toward him.
she thought she was divorced, and actually they weren't. And he came out of the woodwork with his hand out at a very inopportune time.
Oh, boy.
And the new book, Mae West and Her Adonises, focuses on this nightclub aspect of her career in the 1950s, which has never been explored. And I have great photographs, and I have the scripts from the nightclub show, and reviews, and photos of ephemera and advertising materials, and it's and a lot of interviews with her that were
When does that
happening
drop?
at the time. That has just come out. It's available on Amazon.
Oh, good for you.
What's it called?
Mae West and Her Adonises.
Mae West and Her Adonises.
It's a fun
Can we
read. If
find
you
that?
like Mae West, this is fans are going to love it. But for people who don't know anything about this part of her life, this is the first time it's ever been captured.
I can't
in a
believe
book.
there hasn't been a film, a biographical film made about her life.
There
Or has
was.
it?
There was a film, and Jillian
Oh, right.
played the role. It was a TV movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, not great.
I can't
Are
imagine.
you hoping for a film version of the Troy Donahue story?
I think it would make a great film. I didn't
Yeah.
have a great experience with the Sal Mineo film.
Yeah.
So I write books. I don't write films, and I don't write a book thinking this could make a good film. Although I do think, certainly, I think the Diane Mcbain book would make an incredible film for a young leading lady. Incredible.
Well, before we get to Diane Mcbain, because I do want to hear about that book, because that's, I think, what introduced you to the whole Troy story. Let's have fun and cast the Troy Donahue movie. Who, and Dina, you can play along. What current movie star or TV star?
Brad Pitt.
He's a little too old. Like, you have to play. He's got to be like a 20-year-old guy who solves crime on a surfboard.
Trevor Donovan.
Okay, who's this? Trevor Donahue. Google him, please.
Trevor Donahue. He's a very handsome, tall blonde actor. He does a lot of TV, mostly TV, made-for-TV movies. And he looks a bit like him.
Dina's like, yes, Trevor Donovan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
Troy right
That's a
there.
good call. Good
How
call.
about the guy who played Elvis and then he was just in the Airman in the Sky?
Austin Butler?
Austin Butler. He's so dreamy.
Yeah.
No, not.
No, I think...
I don't think
Not
he
right
has the
for-
acting.
okay.
Yeah, I think Trevor, he
This
looks
guy.
the part.
Oh, yeah.
And he is equally not talented as
yeah.
as
Well, but can
As
someone
Troy was.
untalented play someone convincingly untalented?
called
yeah, well,
typecasting.
typecasting.
I enjoyed this conversation so much,
Me
Michael.
too.
I hope you'll allow us to help you promote your further projects.
That'd be great.
Although Mae West is dropping now, are you writing anything? Are you headlining
I
a
am.
project?
I'm working on a biography of 1960s actor Christopher Jones.
Christopher Jones, also
Yeah.
very dreamy.
Very dreamy and very, very problematic. A very hard life with a tough ending.
And talk a little bit before we close about Diane Mcbain, because it feels like that story would make a good film as well.
That would make a wonderful film. I was very good friends with Diane, took care of her until her death. And her life, she had a borderline split personality
Okay.
and very beautiful. Started off as a young teenager, early contract. As soon as she turned 18, she signed a contract at Warner Brothers. And she became, for a while, a very big star. She did a series of films that were successful. But she suffered 2 brutal rapes that she survived, a bad marriage. She was a single mother, and a fascinating person, very religious, very spiritual, and she did a lot of work for rape victims after she had been after the second and final rape, and managed to have a good sense of humor through it all. She toured Vietnam during the war to entertain troops. So did Troy. Troy said he went there because he heard Vietnam was a medicine cabinet.
And it was.
It was.
Yeah.
But Diane had a very interesting life, and it was a career, the same trajectory as Troy and all the other contract players at that time at Warner's. When the studio system, the contract system ended, all of these people were cut loose, and when they were at the studio, they didn't have to do anything. They had people who would publicize them, dress them, make them up, arrange dates,
Haircuts,
everything.
wardrobe.
The
Yeah,
downside is they had to do stuff they didn't want to do.
that's
Yeah.
absolutely right.
But they got paid week in and week
They
out.
got paid without fail.
Yeah.
And, Troy was getting $4,000 a week in 1961, 62. That's a lot of money. It's especially a lot of money to go bankrupt 2 years later. But it was a very interesting time, and there was a lot of camaraderie at the studio. All the contract players knew each other. They never worked outside of the studio.
But in a lot of ways, when that happens to you at age 20, 22, you really never learn the life skills that people learn in their 20s. And then you're cut loose at 30 and you don't even know how to balance a budget or pay the rent or
That's right.
Make sure that the electricity stays turned on.
That's right.
Or all of the other things that adulting requires.
That's exactly right.
Well, we hope we get to talk to you again.
I'd love to.
A lot
That'd
of
be
fun,
great.
Michael.
And thank you.
Thank you.
And we shout out to our studio audience, your sister Melissa, and she's here, and we just have had a blast together. So here are your closing credits. Thanks for coming along. We would love to continue this conversation with you on Instagram and Twitter, where we are at MediaPath Pod, and on Facebook, where our show page is MediaPath Podcast, and our Facebook group is MediaPath with Fritz and Wheezy Podcast Community. You can find full video podcast episodes loaded with bonus visual content on our YouTube channel, MediaPath Podcast. We would love it if you would just judge our appearance and then subscribe. You can also watch a video or two. They're fun. And you can write to us at mediapathpodcast@gmail.com because we would really like to know what you've been watching and what you've been finding along your media path. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a nice rating wherever you get your podcasts and share our social media posts so that your friends can learn about your excellent taste in podcasts. Our website is mediapathpodcast.com. It is a great place to browse around. You should probably make it your homepage. You can browse around and find interesting episodes that you may have missed. We also have a fun and sassy newsletter. It's loaded with bonus quizzes and photos and more dish about our guests. All the newsletters are right there for you to enjoy on our website, or you can sign up to get your newsletter sent directly into your inbox, and we're going to send you just one per week because we do understand healthy boundaries. We want to thank our guest, Michael Gregg Michaud. Our team includes producer Dina Friedman, John Maddox, Bill Filipiak, Mason Brown, Garrett Arch, Jordan Reyes, and you. Our theme music is by me and John Maddox. I am Louise Palanker, here with Fritz Coleman. Be well and wise, and we will see you along the media path.